When Sarah rescued what she believed was an abandoned white kitten, she had no idea it would change her entire life. Ignoring a local farmer's warnings that the animal was a wild predator, Sarah promised to keep him indoors and brought him home, naming him Lucky. From that moment on, nothing in her life would ever be the same. Lucky wasn't just growing, he was transforming. His paws became massive, his eyes wild, and his predatory instincts dangerously sharp. When he shredded solid oak posts and refused kibble for raw meat, Sarah knew something wasn't right. But the terrifying truth only broke when a seasoned veterinarian saw the animal. He took off his glasses and turned pale. Sarah was about to find out that the animal sleeping in her bed wasn't a house cat at all, and saving his life might cost her everything. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The afternoon sun was bright and unforgiving, reflecting off the asphalt of the grocery store parking lot in a way that made the air shimmer. It was a crisp, clear day in late October, the kind of American autumn afternoon where the sky is a piercing, limitless blue and the trees are just beginning to surrender their leaves. Sarah, a woman of gentle demeanor and quiet routines, finished loading the last of her paper grocery sacks into the trunk of her sedan. She was looking forward to the drive home, to the quiet of her apartment, and a cup of tea. But fate, as it often does, arrived not with a shout, but with a whimper. As she slammed the trunk shut, a movement on the bed of a rusted pickup truck parked 2 spaces over caught her eye. It was an old farm truck, caked in the red mud of the county back roads, with a bed full of feed bags and loose straw. There, tucked behind a spare tire, sat a small wire rabbit cage. And inside the cage was a ball of white fluff, pressed so tightly into the corner it looked like a discarded cotton quilt. Sarah hesitated. She wasn't one to pry, but the stillness of the creature bothered her. She stepped closer, shading her eyes against the glare. The creature lifted its head. It was a kitten, or at least it appeared to be. But it was the most striking kitten she had ever seen. Its fur was a blinding, snowy white, thick and plush. But it was the eyes that pinned her to the spot. Wide, terrified, and a blue so pale they looked almost like ice. They weren't the pleading eyes of a domestic stray. They were watchful, intense, and filled with a profound misery that seemed too heavy for such a small body. Just then, the truck's owner returned, swinging a heavy sack of feed over his shoulder. He was an older man, his face weathered by wind and sun, wearing a cap pulled low. He nodded at Sarah, but his expression was grim when he saw her looking at the cage. "Afternoon?" he grunted, tossing the feed into the truck bed. "I couldn't help but notice," Sarah said, her voice tentative. "That's a beautiful kitten. Is he yours?" The farmer sighed, leaning against the side of the truck. He took off his cap and ran a hand through thinning gray hair. "Not mine. Not really. Found the little devil holed up in my barn about 3 days ago. Neighbors have been dumping unwanted litters near the highway again. I reckon he's the only one left of his batch." "He looks scared," Sarah ventured. "He's terrified," the man corrected, his voice rough but not unkind. "And he's trouble. Starving, poor thing. He got into the coop last night. Panic killed 3 of my best layers and the rooster. He didn't eat 'em, just hunted. Instinct, I guess. But I can't afford to lose stock like that. Winters are hard enough." Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach. "So, what are you going to do with him?" The farmer looked at his boots. "Taking him to the vet in town. I can't bring myself to drown a kitten, ma'am. I'm not a cruel man. but I can't keep a chicken killer on the farm. I figure the vet can put him to sleep humane-like." The world seemed to stop spinning for a moment. The bright sunlight suddenly felt cold. Sarah looked back at the cage. The white kitten blinked, a slow, heavy motion, and let out a sound. Not a mew, but a low, raspy chirp. It was a sound of utter defeat. "No," Sarah said. The word was out before she had even formed the thought. "No, please, don't do that." The farmer looked up, surprised. "Ma'am?" "I'll take him," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. She reached into her purse. "How much were the chickens worth? I'll pay you for them. Just let me take the cage." The farmer studied her for a long moment, assessing her sincerity. He saw the trembling in her hands and the steel in her jaw. Slowly, he shook his head. "You don't have to pay me for the birds, ma'am. If you want to give the little scrap a chance, that's payment enough. Just promise me one thing. Keep him inside. He's got a wild streak a mile wide." "I promise," Sarah breathed. Minutes later, the cage was in her passenger seat. She named him Lucky before they even left the parking lot. It was the only name that fit. The first few months in Sarah's apartment were a period of adjustment, filled with a chaotic sort of love. Sarah had owned cats before, but Lucky was different. From the very first night, the bond he formed with her was intense, almost possessive. He didn't act like a normal kitten. He didn't need dough on blankets or chase laser pointers with mindless abandon. Instead, he observed. He would sit on the highest point in the living room, the top of the bookshelf, and watch her with that unnerving, icy stare. When he played, it was serious business. He didn't bat at toys, he stalked them. He would flatten his body against the rug, his oversized paws silent, and launch himself with explosive power. And he was affectionate, but on his own terms. He didn't purr. Instead, when he was happy, he produced a deep, rumbling vibration in his chest, like a distant diesel engine idling. He would approach Sarah when she sat on the sofa, butt his heavy head against her chin, and lick her face with a tongue that felt like coarse sandpaper. "You're just a big, weird brute, aren't you?" Sarah would coo, burying her hands in his incredibly dense white fur. He would rumble in response, chewing gently on the sleeve of her hoodie. Her friends found him unsettling. "Look at the size of those paws," a neighbor remarked one afternoon, pulling her hand back after Lucky nipped at her fingers. "And his tail. It's just a nub. Is he a Manx?" "I think he's a mix," Sarah replied, defending him as she always did. "Maybe part Maine Coon?" The farmer said he was a barn cat. But as winter melted into spring, the Maine Coon theory began to hold less water. Lucky was growing, and he wasn't just getting bigger, he was evolving. By 6 months old, he was the size of a medium dog. His shoulders were muscular and roped with tension, moving like pistons beneath his hide. The cute tufts on his ears had elongated into distinct black tassels. His face, once round and kitten-like, had broadened, developing a ruff of fur around the cheeks that gave him the appearance of a Victorian gentleman with mutton chops. But it was the spots that worried Sarah. As his kitten coat shed out, faint, ghostly rosettes began to appear on his white flanks, pale beige markings that looked like shadows cast by leaves. He was becoming destructive, not out of malice, but out of sheer power. He tore through the drywall near the window, trying to get at a squirrel outside. He shredded a solid oak scratching post in a week, and his dietary needs were insatiable. He turned his nose up at Kibble, screaming, a blood-curdling, high-pitched yowl, until she fed him raw chicken and beef. Sarah knew deep down that something was amiss, but she loved him. He slept curled against her back every night, a heavy, warm anchor in her lonely life. He was her protector, her shadow. The breaking point came in June. Sarah noticed Lucky was limping slightly on his rear leg. Worried about hip dysplasia, common in large breeds, she coaxed him into a large dog crate. It was a struggle that left her arm scratched and drove him to the veterinary clinic. The waiting room was busy. When Sarah walked in, struggling with the weight of the crate, a hush fell over the room. A golden retriever whimpered and hid behind its owner's legs. A cat in a carrier near the desk began to hiss violently. The receptionist stood up, peering over the counter. "Name?" she asked, then her eyes dropped to the crate. Lucky let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the metal bars. "Sarah, I have an appointment for Lucky." The vet tech came out to escort them, but stopped dead in his tracks 3 feet from the crate. He peered through the mesh. "Ma'am," he said, his voice very quiet, "do not open that crate." "He's just scared," Sarah said, feeling defensive. "No, ma'am," the tech said, backing away slowly to grab the doctor. "That is not a domestic cat." When Dr. Henderson, a seasoned vet with 30 years of experience, entered the exam room, he didn't look at the chart. He looked at Lucky, who was sitting calmly now, staring through the bars with those piercing predator eyes. Dr. Henderson exhaled a long breath. "Well," he said, taking off his glasses, "I haven't seen one of these since my days in Wyoming. Sarah, do you know what you have here?" "He's a barn cat mix," Sarah said, though her voice trembled. She knew. In that moment, she finally admitted it to herself. "He is a lynx rufus," the doctor said gently. "A bobcat, and judging by that coat, leucistic, maybe partial albino. That's why he's white. It's a genetic anomaly, extremely rare." Sarah slumped against the exam table. "But he sleeps in my bed. He watches TV with me." "I believe you," Dr. Henderson said, his tone sympathetic but grave. "He's imprinted on you. You raised him from a bottle, likely, or very young. He sees you as his mother. But Sarah, look at those claws. Look at that jaw strength. He is nearing sexual maturity. His hormones are going to kick in, and he is going to become frustrated, territorial, and potentially dangerous. Not because he's mean, but because he is a wild animal living in a box." "I can't give him up," Sarah whispered, tears spilling over. "He's my family. If I send him away, he'll die. He doesn't know how to hunt. He doesn't know to be afraid of cars." "You're right," the vet agreed. "He is non-releasable. If you put him in the woods, he will starve or approach a human for food and be shot. But you cannot keep him in an apartment. It is illegal, and more importantly, it is cruel." The reality of the situation crashed down on Sarah like a landslide. She was in violation of state wildlife laws. The very creature she had saved from death was now facing a life of imprisonment or confiscation. The following weeks were a blur of bureaucracy and heartbreak. Sarah contacted the State Department of Wildlife. She expected to be arrested. Instead, she found a weary but knowledgeable officer named Inspector Miller. Miller came to the apartment. He saw Lucky, who was now pacing the living room, chuffing at the window. Miller didn't condemn her, but he laid out the hard truth. "He's a magnificent animal," Miller said, watching Lucky sniff his boots. "But he needs earth. He needs to climb. He needs to mark territory. You have 2 choices, Sarah. You surrender him to a sanctuary, though most are full up and underfunded, or you become a licensed wildlife custodian." "I'll do it," Sarah said instantly. "I'll get the license." Miller raised an eyebrow. "It's not just a piece of paper. You need a Class 2 wildlife enclosure. We're talking outdoor, secure, heavy-gauge fencing, dig barriers, a double-entry safety system, and a minimum of 800 square feet. You can't do that on a balcony." Sarah looked around her comfortable, safe apartment. It was the only home she had known for a decade. She looked at Lucky, who was currently shredding a cardboard box with joyous intensity, his white fur glowing in the afternoon sun. She didn't hesitate. "Okay, tell me exactly what I need to do." Love makes us do irrational things. For Sarah, it meant liquidating her life. She put the apartment on the market. She sold her furniture. She dipped into her retirement savings. Within 2 months, she had purchased a small, dilapidated foreclosure on 3 acres of land way out in the county, far enough from neighbors to meet zoning laws. She moved into the drafty little house in late summer. The place needed a new roof and the plumbing groaned, but Sarah didn't care. Her focus was entirely on the backyard. She hired a contractor, but when the money began to run low, she fired him and started working herself. She learned how to mix concrete for the footings. She learned how to stretch heavy-gauge chain link. She learned about cantilevers, angled fencing at the top to prevent climbing out. It was grueling work. Her hands were blistered, her back ached constantly, and her bank account was hovering near zero. Every night she would sit in the unfinished structure with Lucky on a leash, crying into his fur. He seemed to sense the stress. He would rub his cheek against hers, making that deep, throaty rumble, licking the salt from her tears. "I'm trying, Lucky," she would whisper. "I promise, I'm trying." Then came the deadline. Inspector Miller called. He was coming for the final inspection in 10 days. If the enclosure wasn't finished and up to code, Lucky would be seized. The state had found a slot for him at a zoo in another state, a concrete pit where he would be a display animal. Sarah was desperate. She needed more lumber for the climbing platforms and another roll of heavy fencing for the roof. She was $3,000 short. That night, staring at her phone in the dim light of her kitchen, Sarah did something she terrified her. She asked for help. She wrote a post on a community forum. She didn't beg. She just told the story. She wrote about the farm truck, the kitten in the rabbit cage, the bond they shared, and the desperate race to build him a sanctuary so he wouldn't be taken away. She posted a picture of Lucky, not the scary predator, but the goofy, cross-eyed boy with a bucket stuck on his head and another of him hugging her arm with his massive paws. She hit post and went to sleep, expecting nothing. When she woke up, her phone was buzzing so hard it nearly vibrated off the nightstand. The story had gone viral locally. People were captivated by the white ghost of the county and the woman who gave up everything for him. By noon, a truck from the local lumber yard pulled into her driveway. "Paid for by an anonymous donor," the driver said, unloading stacks of pressure-treated wood. By 1 p.m., 3 guys she had never met showed up with tool belts. "We heard you need a hand with the roofing," one said. "I've got a bobcat of my own, the machine kind, not the cat. We can dig those post holes in an hour." It was a modern-day barn raising. Neighbors brought casseroles. A retired welder fixed the gate latches. Children stood at a safe distance, watching in awe as the massive enclosure took shape. When Inspector Miller pulled up the driveway 10 days later, he stopped his truck and just stared. The enclosure stood tall and proud. It was magnificent. It had high platforms for observing, hollow logs for hiding, a splash pool, and complex climbing structures made of cedar. It was secure, professional, and filled with enrichment. Miller walked the perimeter, checking the tension of the wire, shaking the posts. He checked the double safety vestibule. He checked the freezer full of proper meat. Finally, he turned to Sarah, who was holding her breath, her hands clasped so tight her knuckles were white. Miller smiled, a rare, genuine expression that crinkled the corners of his eyes. He pulled a clipboard from under his arm and stamped the document with a heavy thud. "Well done, Sarah," he said. "Approved." 3 years later, the late afternoon light is different out here in the country. It's warmer, softer, filtering through the tall pines and casting long golden shadows across the sanctuary. Sarah walks down the gravel path, carrying a bucket of enrichment treats. Ice blocks with fish frozen inside and scent-soaked burlap sacks. Her walk is confident now. Her boots are muddy, and her hands are rougher than they used to be, but she looks younger, lighter. She reaches the main habitat. It has a sign on the front, "The Lucky Star Sanctuary, Education and Rehabilitation." Behind the heavy gauge mesh, a ghost moves. Lucky is fully grown now, a magnificent 35-pound specimen of pure muscle and instinct. His white coat gleams in the twilight, the faint spots barely visible like clouds on snow. His ear tufts twitch as he hears her approach. He doesn't rush the fence like a dog. He flows toward it. Sarah unlocks the safety vestibule, steps in, locks it behind her, and then approaches the mesh wall. "Hey, handsome," she says softly. Lucky approaches the wire. He stands on his hind legs, putting his massive front paws on the fencing at eye level with her. He leans forward and presses his forehead against the wire. Sarah leans in and presses her forehead to his, separated only by the steel mesh. It is a ritual they perform every evening, a silent communion between two species that shouldn't be friends, but are. Lucky closes his eyes and lets out that sound, the deep, rhythmic chuff rumble that vibrates in Sarah's own chest. It is a sound of contentment. Sarah's life is nothing like she planned. She doesn't have the condo or the pristine furniture. Instead, she has a fox recovering from a car strike in the smaller pen, a great horned owl healing in the flight barn, and a community of volunteers who look to her for guidance. She found her purpose not in the safety of the known, but in the wild uncertainty of the rescue. She looks at Lucky, the animal that started it all. He is wild, yes. He is dangerous, yes. But as he looks at her with those ice-blue eyes, softening in the warm glow of the setting sun, she sees the kitten from the farm truck. He drops to all fours and rubs his flank along the fence, inviting her to walk with him. "Come on then," she says, smiling. "Let's go check on the others." As they walk together, separated by a fence but joined by a tether of love that defies logic, the sun dips below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. It is a good life. It is a hard life. But as Sarah listens to the sounds of the night waking up around her, she knows she is exactly where she is meant to be. And Lucky, the ghost cat who wasn't a cat at all, chuffs softly in agreement.